And
Well,
in a month.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but we just went live.
Ah.
All right. Give people a minute to tune in here. Sorry, we're a bit late, folks. We had some technical issues with Zoom. It's funny, no matter how often you use Zoom, you never get over the learning curve. I haven't. No one else I met has. Anyway, looks like we've got a few people joining us now. This is another live stream produced by the First Tuesday Conservatives, presented by Alpha News. I'm your host, Kyle Hooten. Today, we have with us Jason Yates, the CEO of My Faith Votes, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to mobilizing churches and people of faith to vote. As you know, we're currently in our Countdown to November 3rd series, so it's a very timely guest. Mr. Yates, thank you for being with us.
Yeah, I appreciate the time and letting me share a little bit about what we're doing and why it's important.
Absolutely. Well, I think what you're doing is very important. Now, let's just jump right into it. Could you give me a little bit of background on your organization, what you guys do to mobilize faith communities to get to the polls?
Yeah, absolutely. So we got started in 2016, and the story, it goes back to the person who really inspired My Faith Votes, and that's Dr. Ben Carson. Our founder is a literary agent. He's an attorney and represents authors, mostly Christian authors, on book deals. And he was one of his clients is Dr. Ben Carson, and he had written a book called One Nation. And in that book, it talks all about how do we as a country, as a nation, get back to what we really want and aspire to as a nation. And part of that was a chapter around voting and how to be an informed voter. And from that, he was asked to write a smaller book called One Vote that talks about how do you become an informed voter. And it was in that process of writing that book that our founder discovered there were 25 million Christians in the United States that were registered to vote, but were sitting on the sidelines. They weren't engaging, they weren't voting. And we couldn't believe it. And we just said, we got to do something. And out of that birthed My Faith Votes. And we got operational in 2016. We invited Dr. Carson to be our honorary national chairman, which he accepted in that year, in that run through 2016. And we made a difference. We truly did, through digital media, through broadcast media, just helping people understand why it's important, why their faith should be engaged in politics, in government, and why it's essential.
Absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with that mission. So you're saying that there are 25 million religious people that don't make it to the polls. Why do you think that is?
Okay, so I think there's 4 reasons. And you're asking a really good question, because if you want to motivate them, right, which is our mission, we want to motivate and equip them to go to the polls. So if you want to do that, you got to understand, okay, so why aren't they? What's keeping them? And I break it down into 4 reasons. The first is that they are, and excuse me, but I'm going to use some adjectives that some people might not find as very kind, okay? So the first is they're selfish. They think about, well, my vote doesn't make a difference. And so they're thinking about me and how I can, does my vote count? My individual vote. What I really encourage people to think about is, okay, when you give to the poor, when you help at a food kitchen, when you do something that you know is good, are you thinking about how your one act is going to make a significant difference? You want it to, but you understand that it's the collective, that if we all join in, if we all participate, we can make a difference, that we can do good. And so that's my response to people who say, well, my one vote doesn't really make a difference. There's another excuse people give, and I think that's that, and again, excuse the terms here, but I think they're self-righteous. They say that, politics is too dirty. I could never vote for one of those, right? They look at the choices and they say, my faith, I can't engage in that. That's too ugly. But the choices are there. They're binary. And frankly, I think the way we look at it is Christ died for all of us. He recognizes that, or we recognize that all have sinned. All are flawed, right? So every choice we make, whether it's president or whether it's local school board, the choices are always flawed because people are flawed. We have to make the best decision we can. So let's engage and let's not think about, oh, this is too dirty, this is too ugly. Let's do the best that we can. There's another reason I say, and I think this is lazy. A lot of people say, well, I don't know what's on the ballot. I don't know. I'm too busy, all of this. Well, there's a thing called Google, and there's a thing called My Faith Votes. And we've done a lot of work to bring all the information about voting. We have a voter guide that covers all 100,000 elections happening this year. It's an online voter guide. You can find it at myfaithvotes.org. So there's no excuse to say, I don't know what's happening, or I don't know anything about my choices. And the last reason I would give you is that they are deceived. There is a lot of people who believe in this phrase that we all know called separation of church and state. And they look at that and they say, there's a separation. And true, there should be a separation of institutions. The church should not be engaged in politics in the sense of intermixing those two institutions. But God made government. If we step out of it, if we don't engage in this piece of our community and our nation, then what will happen is chaos and deception, and those people are deceived. So those four reasons are the reasons I think people aren't voting.
Absolutely. I mean, to your first 2 points, it's always true that if you don't care about government, government will care about you. We've said this multiple times on the show. And if you think your vote doesn't matter, I'm sorry to tell you, but it does. Because if everyone thought their vote didn't matter, nothing's going to get done. So I'm totally with you there. I really enjoy your last point about separation of church and state, because this is something that I wanted to bring up in this interview. A lot of people always claim that, Christians have no, or people of faith generally have no public role in politics, and that religion shouldn't enter the political discussion. It seems that you quite obviously oppose that. I also oppose that. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that argument.
Well, I mean, I think what has added to this are certain rules and regulations in our nation. And one in particular is what we call the Johnson Amendment, which was established in the 1950s. And when that came along, it said as nonprofits and specifically churches that they cannot speak into, they cannot endorse candidates. Now, or if they do, they will lose their tax exempt status. And I think that has layered on this argument of separation of church and state. Here's one thing that I think, Kyle, I would hope most of your listeners know, but I'm often surprised that many people don't. I was sitting with a pastor and I shared with him and said, this phrase, the separation of church and state, does not exist in our nation's documents. It is not in our Constitution.
Right.
He was shocked. This pastor, this friend of mine, was shocked. He said, no, come on. It's there. I said, no, it's not. It's a letter that Jefferson wrote to a church. And he was trying to explain, more importantly, the point that I think you and I would hold, which is there is a separation for the good of the church, in that government doesn't influence the church. But the church can certainly participate and should participate and bring the influence of our faith into the governing of our communities.
100%. I mean, I'm totally with you there. Most people don't understand that. I mean, just to reiterate, separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. It's not a constitutional principle of America. And second, as you touched on, separation of church and state exists to protect the church from the state and not not the reverse, not at all the reverse. So tell me, what sort of things are you doing to mobilize people of faith to vote? You mentioned a guide that you have to all the elections. Could you tell us about that?
Well, sure. We have on our website, myfaithvotes.org, we have a voting assistance center. And the assistance center is really all the resources you need as a voter, both critical deadlines and information just about elections, where to go, where you personally need to go vote. It's all personalized, so you can put in your address and figure out all of those things. You can register to vote, etc. But it also is providing you tools and resources to understand the choices that you have. So on top of a really fantastic party platform summary that breaks down how the parties, and these are in the words of the platforms, it's quotes from the platforms of where those parties are headed, the vision that those parties have for the direction of our nation. We've broken it down in terms of certain issues that people need to be aware of and know what is the direction, regardless of that candidate, where is the direction of that party and where they headed. But on top of that, we have a voter guide. You can go and input your address. It will give you specifically all the way from president down to dog catcher of who are your choices, who's on your ballot, and where do they stand on key issues. And you can even see endorsements and such that they've received. So it's a really valuable tool, and anyone can go to that. It's accessible whether you're in New York City or rural Minnesota.
Now, you mentioned earlier that nobody's perfect, and it can be very difficult to make a political decision in a flawed world where there is original sin and no one's ever going to check all the boxes. So when you're using these tools that you provide, and when you're analyzing a candidate, what attributes should a religious voter look for when casting their vote?
Yeah, well, you got to start with the Bible, right? I mean, the Bible has something to say about critical issues. And so we don't just encourage people to vote. We say we want them to do three things. We want them to pray unceasingly for our nation, for our leaders, and for these elections. We want them to think biblically about the issues, and then to vote consistently in every election. And so as you are approaching an election, as you're approaching your choices and what's on your ballot, I would encourage people. I mean, it may be even as process oriented as getting out a piece of paper, drawing the candidates, writing what the issues are that you care about, list what do the candidates say about those issues, what does the Bible say, and make your choices from there. I think if everyone did that kind of due diligence, man, we can get 90 million Christians across this nation engaging, making a difference. And now they aren't all going to vote the same way. I don't expect every single Christian to vote the same way. God has given different passions, different interests to each person. And I think because of that, it creates an opportunity for, hey, this isn't, this one issue, that's not a particular thing that I know about or I care about, but you do. And I'm glad you do, because you're bringing a different perspective and you're helping support and protect people around that particular issue. But we can trust God. And that's my point, that if we all do that, we can trust God. There's a lot of people who just want to say, just tell me who to vote for. I get that. We're all busy, but we got to take the time, invest the time to pray, to think, and to vote.
Absolutely. I mean, voting's a large decision, and it would be foolish to make large decisions without consulting the Lord. So I'm totally with you there. Jumping now just to the topic of Christianity in American politics more broadly. A lot of politicians, they claim to be Christian, they claim to profess certain values, but you don't always see those values manifest in their policy. What are your thoughts on this? How do you think Christians can become better represented in government?
Well, I think it starts at the local level. I really believe that, first and foremost, that we have to get more Christians engaged. And so I would encourage, from your audience, if you live in even a small community and there's an opportunity to serve on your school board, there's an opportunity to serve on your city council, really pray about that. Consider that, because the more we can get people of faith engaged and involved, the better. And we know that those are generally starting places, right? I mean, that from there, someone may go into state politics or even federal politics. So I think we really need to take that seriously. Secondly, I think that we often say that our formula of pray, think, and vote is really a formula of pray, think, and act, right? It's just for My Faith Votes. Our primary action that we want to encourage people to take is voting. But our faith should be action oriented. And so here's the thing I would say, Kyle, that I would encourage every Christian to do, if they're not, is really considering, what is God calling them to? Because if God is calling you to be engaged, let's say it's around poverty, let's say it's around foster care, let's say it's around the environment, whatever it is that passion is, get involved, get engaged, and God is going to lead you into places of influence, to make a difference. And that may be locally, it may be nationally, but that's a way we can really make a difference. Just trusting God with little steps of obedience, and He's going to place the passions into our heart to make a difference in a bigger way.
100%. I mean, we're broadcasting right now via Alpha News, a Minneapolis-based outlet, and we've seen in Minneapolis how much impact local politicians can have. I mean, if local politicians can figure out how to attempt to defund the police, and if local politicians can have all this power, then maybe we should be getting some Christians also into local politics.
More than ever before. This year is a year where we see the impact and the results of who we elect at the state and local level. I mean, I think we see it more than ever, how it's impacted the way we worship, the way we just are living our lives. And I think this year, more than ever, it should compel Christians to get out and vote.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that you were founded in 2016, correct?
Right, that's right.
And at that time, we had about 25 million Christians who weren't voting. Do you have any data for the 2018 midterms? And then what's your projection for 2020? What are our numbers looking like?
Well, we're seeing turnout increase. Now, our focus has been on certain geographies as we try and impact federal elections. All of our resources are available nationwide, but as we spend some advertising money, et cetera, we're focused on certain areas. We are seeing an uptick overall in voter participation. My goal is that we would jump from about 61%. The Barna Research Group, after 2016, did some research, did a study, and said that 61% of evangelical Christians voted. That means 39% didn't. And so our goal is to see at least 80%. I don't know that we will see that this year. I pray that it does happen. But that's our long-term goal, to really see that happen. We've seen an uptick of a couple percentage points. That's a lot of people, a couple percentage points across the nation. But let's keep magnifying that and propelling it all the way to 80% if we can.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, 1 in 3 evangelicals not voting is very, very significant. That means, if you're in the church pew, look to your left, look to your right, one of you didn't vote. That's a big problem.
That's right.
I understand that you're a nonpartisan organization, so I'll tread lightly around this subject. But when it comes to Christians voting, do you have the breakdowns of how they tend to vote, party-wise and candidate-wise?
Well, I think you do see more evangelical Christians voting Republican than you do Democrat. A lot of that is tied to the issue of life, because I think a lot of Christians look at primary issues and secondary issues, and they categorize the issue of life as a primary issue, where it's really hard to cast a vote for a politician and a party that outright supports abortion. And now, where it used to be opposing whatever's not a safe abortion, and now it's just supporting a woman's right to choose, all the way up to birth. And so, and that's in their party platform. And so I think there's a lot of Christians who just say, man, I just cannot support that. And so I think that's one of the biggest reasons why you see such a divide between those two parties.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, life is the big one. I'm with you on that. What are some other issues that you see, a lot of people of faith being motivated to vote around?
Yeah, religious freedom is, first of all, one of the big ones. And we look at,
Especially with coronavirus and the churches.
yeah, I mean, you look at how churches are not being allowed to assemble, or really what appears to be bias by some governors or state legislators, cities even, on who's allowed to assemble and who's not allowed to assemble. You see examples, in Colorado, there was a baker who the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. He was convicted, and he and his wife agreed that they would not make cakes that they considered really their art for things that went across opposed their beliefs and their faith. But they would certainly sell any of their other goods.
Yeah.
And that's a case that got a lot of attention. And we're seeing more and more of those type of cases where religious freedom is being infringed upon. Other issues, there's a lot of focus on Israel and support of Israel and how do we stand with Israel. We look at Bible verses that say that I will bless the nation that supports Israel. And so that's a particular concern as well. Now, we're seeing a lot around how we treat immigration. And so that's where we start to get, into, well, you could look at it one way or you could look at it another. And a Christian could look at it in both ways. And this is where, I think that formula, pray, think, and vote, really is necessary, that we come before God and we ask him for guidance in these decisions. When we think about immigration, we've got to look at the laws and the organization of our country, our nation. We've got to look at care and compassion for those in need, and whose responsibilities are primary in those particular things. So there's a lot of issues that aren't necessarily clear cut in their solutions, but there's a lot of principles we need to understand.
I'm glad you bring up the immigration question, because that seems to be a dividing line between even me and some of my Christian friends, because there is that tension there between caring for your own people and caring for everybody else and being kind to the neighbors. Who are your neighbors? What does that mean? How do you apply that to the modern context? And I can't agree with you more when it comes down to, you got to pray about it. You got to think about it. You have to be an informed voter. Absolutely. Absolutely. When it comes to the debates, just because I feel like we have to talk about the debates, they just happened. I saw a little piece on your website about the debates. What is the religious take on the debates here? The state of political discourse more broadly. What are your thoughts?
Wow, I'm probably like anybody, any American or anything. You just look at the depth to where of depth in a bad way of how low the discord is in these debates, and it's a painful thing to watch. Now, some will argue that there's probably a reason and a purpose behind even the president and how he's attacking and things like that. But I think we all wish, right, that there is that we would return to a place of greater civility and discourse. But there are really key and important issues too, and we must make sure that those issues are being talked about, and that truth is really revealed. I think one of the things. Here's the thing, Kyle, that I think I personally believe there is a lot of deception, and the enemy is using deception throughout our world, throughout our nation. And that deception begins with a primary lie that God does not exist. And you listen to a lot of the issues, and I think you can boil most of those down to this lie that God does not exist. And so now it's not President Trump's role or Joe Biden's role to say that God exists, but what are the principles behind what they support? What are the issues and the policies that they're putting forth? And at the heart of those, is there a recognition of a God and a supremacy in creation that drives our goodness? And so that's I think what we're driving for, in this discourse. We've got to be somewhat civil. We've got to be forceful for the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you cannot have morality and order without God. Without God, you're left with nihilism. And if the role of government is to uphold order and to enforce some semblance of a hierarchy in society, then it seems to me that you have to acknowledge the existence of God and have some legitimate moral framework to fall back on. I'm with you there 100%. We've had a couple of different religious figures on the show. We had Friar Altman. We had a Baptist minister from the Twin Cities. And now we have you, not a minister, but definitely a religious person involved in politics. And I've kind of been asking the same question, and that relates to the second commandment. The second commandment, I have heard, can be interpreted both to prohibit cursing and foul language, but also to prohibit people from falsely proclaiming the will of God. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord your God in vain can mean you shouldn't be, claiming this is the will of the Lord, this is the party of the Lord, these are the politics of God, this kind of thing. What are your thoughts on that? And how should Christians navigate that issue? Because there's a very fine line between saying, I'm voting my values and, X party is the party of God. And I feel like a lot of people, including myself, are a little bit uncomfortable when that line is crossed.
Yeah, one of the things that's been on my heart, and actually my wife said something to me the other day, but what's been on my heart is humility. And she said to me that she feels that God has been saying to her this phrase that is, now I'm trying to, I just lost my thought on it, but you have not because you ask not. And that's in the book of James. And when you read through that and you read through the book of James, what you recognize is that isn't really about that you're not asking and therefore you have not. Mm-hmm. It's about how you're asking. It's about your the way you approach the throne of God. And I think what has been laid on my wife's heart and what is being said is there is a lack of humility even within the church. That we need to humble ourselves. We need to come before God. We need to confess, yes, our own sins. We need to confess for our nation. We need to seek him and what is best. And so to your question, I would say we just have to have a spirit of humility. And yes, we should be bold. We need to claim truth where truth is clear in the Bible. And we should not steer away or waver around what is truth. But at the same time, we must have humility that we serve a powerful God. And he knows all, we don't. We're limited. And so I would just say, rather than just charging forward, let's, in every election year especially, but all the time, our primary pursuit is to seek the face of God in prayer, humble ourselves, and then to take action.
Yeah, and that can be a very difficult task, especially if you're engaging with politics, where people are always attacking you personally and your policies personally, and you're wrapped
Yeah,
up in a personal debate. To kind of turn that off and recognize that you're absolutely nothing compared to God, and that's where the real conversation needs to be taking place.
yeah.
I'm with you on that, absolutely. Um, what are your thoughts on Christianity's future in America more generally? You've mentioned that there's kind of this hostility to God and to religion, and I think we've seen this growing in recent years. We have sort of celebrities and public figures that are openly anti-religious. We have politicians at the local and federal levels that are openly anti-church. How worried are you about the future of Christianity in this country?
Well, I think the Bible tells us that there will be um, there will be lies. There will be many who speak falseness and lead others astray. That it talks about multiple antichrists, and so I think if we read the Bible literally, we understand. We can look around and understand what is happening, what's transpiring in our nation. So the future for Christianity, I don't think we should be surprised if we start to receive more persecution, if actually we see fewer people believing in Christ. Now, I don't want to see that, right? I don't want to see fewer faithfully believing,
Mhm.
but this is also an opportunity, right? We have to have a lens of looking and seeing what is God doing.
Mhm.
And now we may want to see something different because we enjoy our comforts, right? But what is God doing? And I believe that He is refining, and um, He is calling people to strengthen their faith. Now, not all will, and so we will see a remnant, right? But that remnant may be smaller. We're seeing the starting of that, I believe. Now, it's not my desire, but if we have a remnant that is fully in and fully on fire for God, I think we'll see even greater things happen in this nation and in this world.
Yeah, I mean, that's a daunting but encouraging message. I suppose, as the old adage goes, hard times make strong men. They also
Right.
make strong faiths, and strong faith makes for good times. So I'm
Yeah.
glad we got a little bit of a positive message in there. At risk of beating a dead horse, it feels like everyone that's interested in religion and politics has talked about Amy Coney Barrett, but I'm a big fan of ACB. What are your thoughts on ACB, her policies, and hopefully her installment as a Supreme Court justice?
Well, first of all, I do think she will be installed. I mean,
Yes,
I believe they
Trump's
have
been
the
clear about
votes, and this election really has no bearing on that, right? I mean, it's going to happen before the end of this year because of just where the Senate stands and such. Um, Here's what you got to love about her. She is a woman who has lived out her faith. She has not compartmentalized it in one area of her life and kept it out of other areas of her life. She has lived it in her family and the way that she has been obedient in raising her kids, caring for them, um, uh, through adoption. She has lived it out in her professional life as well. But I think she's really smart, right? I mean, everyone sees that you look at her credentials and she's really smart. Here's what's sad is um, years ago, this would have been a nomination that would have been easily confirmed.
yeah.
This is we look back just to 1993 when Ruth Bader Ginsburg was nominated. There were very, very few. I think it was on one hand of people who opposed her nomination. Um, and now, fast forward 27 years later, and we have a candidate where it comes down to party lines. So what's sad is we're in a place where we have a wonderful candidate who's extremely qualified, but no longer are we recognizing that, but we're voting just along party lines.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think she's a very strong candidate as well. I agree with you that she will be confirmed. It's going to happen. And I really, really look forward to it. So, for our viewers that are just now tuning in, this is Jason Yates. He's the CEO of My Faith Votes. You can find them at myfaithvotes.org. Before we wrap here, Mr. Yates, tell us again where people can find your resources and, what types of things people need to consider when they're going to the polls.
Yeah, myfaithvotes.org. Myfaithvotes.org, easy way to get connected. We've got a voting assistance center where we have all kinds of tools and resources to understand what's on your ballot, what positions those candidates stand for, as well as just information about your elections, polling places, et cetera. I'll give you one other resource. If you text the word vote to the code 73075, 73075. Text the word vote, and you will sign up to receive voting reminders for every election, not this one alone, but every election going forward, regardless of where you live. And I'll tell you, this is really beneficial. This last year, I got a text alert reminder of an election that was a runoff for city council. I didn't know it was happening. I'm in this business. It's helpful. It will let you know about every opportunity so that you can pray, think, and vote consistently in every election.
I mean, that's truly impressive. Cataloging every election, like you said earlier, from president to dog catcher. I work in media. It's kind of what I do. And I also end up missing some smaller elections. So it's really impressive, what you guys are doing there. We really appreciate the work you're doing. We see a lot of people on the left with these massive voter registration and get it to the polls initiatives, but we see very few that are coming at it from a religious perspective, or very few that are coming at it from any other perspective. So we really appreciate your work and really appreciate you coming on the show tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. One announcement before we close down the live stream. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., we're going to have Twyla Braze, the president and co-founder of the Citizens Council for Health and Freedom and the author of Big Brother in the Exam Room. We'll be discussing with her the dangerous truths about electronic health records. We all know that Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, these things are spying on us, and there's various privacy issues with those electronic systems, but few people consider how those can also impact our health care. Should be a very interesting conversation. Again, that's at 3 p.m. tomorrow, right here on Alpha News. Thanks for tuning in, folks.